I'm Madelyn Blair, your host of Unlocked. On today's show, TJ Elliott has returned. We will talk about the challenges we all face in the workplace, along with his deep knowledge into how to understand and deal with them. After our conversation, the subject will take on a different tone, so stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about activating the resilient leader in you. All of us confront challenges in our lives. In the workplace, much of those challenges have been studied and studied over time with varying results in understanding and solution. Today, we're talking with TJ Elliott, who has explored this arena deeply and with success. For those who weren't with us last week, TJ Elliott is the former Chief Learning Officer and Vice President of Human Resources at Educational Testing Services, sometimes known as ETS. He now leads the theater company he co-founded in 2018 called Knowledge Workings. His current work represents a return to a career that he held in the late 1970s through the mid-80s, when he joined the corporate world in research and management consulting for and with some of our best-known companies and organizations, from Pepsi to NASA. His current offering is a play called Honor, which is playing off-Broadway in New York City. Without further ado, TJ, welcome to Unlocked.
Madelyn, thank you. This has been great to come back for this second conversation. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. You know, there are so many issues today in the workplace, and I thought it might be useful to just sort of explore from our perspectives, what are some of those key forces that are really making it challenging for people?
Well, I took a great interest in understanding performance. And the reason for doing that was that during the career that I had as a management consultant, that's what a lot of issues boiled down to, although they were often presented with a different wrapper. But then you would get in there and do that classic consulting work of interviewing a bunch of people there, and you would sort of come back to, well, what you're really talking about is performance. And I think something that you said in your introduction is that these have been studied and studied, and for some of us, we know those early studies there. But I think one of the largest issues, or most pressing issues, uh, is being able to incorporate those things that we know into our daily practice. I think that there's a disconnect, and what is striking to me, even though I'm now at something of a remove there, is that now we have complicated things much further with the introduction of artificial intelligence. I mean, as we are talking about this, the International Longshoremen Association Union is on strike over the issue of automation. And so all of the other things that were already complicated about the logistics of our great ports in the United States clearly have this other rather significant complication, because they see automation as taking away jobs. And it reminds me of, this is 25, 30 years ago, as a management consultant, when outsourcing became such a major issue as we worked with organizations there. So I think the issues are, can we be agile to deal with the day to day, while at the same time carving out moments of reflection so that we can learn from from what we just did day to day. That seems to me to be a real quandary.
Oh, I think you bring up a very good point. I think we can learn a great deal by self-observation. I've often worked with line managers who have particular problems, and we come out of a meeting and I say, okay, now tell me what you did in that meeting. What were the reactions of people? How did you feel? And they begin to examine their own behaviors, the behaviors of their staff, and you all of a sudden you see the light bulb go off.
Yeah.
The answer was there. They just had
Yeah.
to take the time to reflect on it and really think about it.
Yeah.
And you're right. We can talk about the common things, and yet we are constantly impinged by things like a longshoreman strike, and that's going to impact us
Oh, yeah.
if it's not
Yeah.
resolved soon uh, in our pocketbooks, if nothing else.
Mm.
I think there's also uh, you mentioned AI and this whole aspect of the fact that our decisions in this, I think they've become more complex, but some people would say, no, we just understand the complexity better now. I don't care what it is. There's still we're dealing with complexity and a lot of ambiguity. You just can't predict what's going to happen. Um, are there in with all of those impacting from the outside? There's also the common issues of people themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't changed. We're still humans.
Right.
And I think that was some of the things you were talking about too, or hinting at.
Well, I absolutely, it's interesting to me, and I'm going to keep on going back to the statement you made introducing this here of these things have been studied, and so there was a lot of work done around human performance improvement, and some people felt turned off by it because they felt it was too mechanical, and it goes all the way back to the Gilbreths and Taylor, and so people worry about that, and they're right to. They're right to because
To our listeners, just to say that Taylor was one of the very earliest management
yes.
gurus.
Yes, and appropriately derided in ways because he did try to take the human element out of it to a certain degree there. But the folks who then came along with human performance had a very valuable addition, in my view, to the subject. And I would have these conversations. Um, I had made a rule that no one could be fired unless I signed off on it. When I took over that role, I had been the chief learning officer already, and then they added to my portfolio human resources. And I started to, just late at night look at what had been done previously. I was like, my gosh, well, what are all these terminations here? And I'd sort of read the paperwork and go, why, we took a lot of time to recruit this person, and then we let them go 6 months later. Uh, and what I would share with me, they'd say, well, why do you want to do that? I'd say because it's often not within the control of the person. And that's where I would bring up human performance management that would take a look at that and say, look, we've studied performance and we can tell you that maybe from 10 to 30% is within the control of the individual. But did you select the right person for the job in the first place? Did you then give them the instruction they needed to be able to do the job? Is there support in terms of some sort of knowledge management system that they can go to when they come across something that is unfamiliar? Are they being compensated correctly for what they're doing there? And the big one for me, what is the quality of the management in their particular area there? How are they being managed? Well, of course, it's the manager who fired them who's talking to me, so that that didn't go over real well all the time. And I'd say, look, you don't need to be threatened by this. We want to help you with this here.
Yeah.
And so you'd say, how did you talk to them about what you perceive to be their performance issues there? And I would say I was successful about half the time in getting managers to then think about it differently. But others wanted to think about it as they had always thought about it. One of my favorite sayings is from Bas Verplanken out at the University of Bath, who studies change. And we were hearing Bas talk about this one day, and I said, Bas, what's the most significant thing we should know about change in organizations? And he said, people tend to do what they tend to do. And I said, that is wonderful. That is absolutely marvelous. And it's so true. So, there's a lot of work done on that there of how do you actually make change happen. I think that's an issue that comes up when we talk about these. And whoever's telling you it's not more complex, I couldn't disagree more with that. There, it is more complex. If you all of a sudden are bringing in these other systems here, how could it not be more complex? And so what we would say to people there is you have to think about how you want to create change in the workplace, and again, you have to take a look at what has actually worked there. There's a wonderful book on this, Intentional Revolutions, that talks about the different ways in which you can affect change within organizations there. And one of the big learnings from that book is you can coerce to create change, but once you use coercion, you can't use any of the other methods. You're done. So if coercion doesn't work, you've got nowhere to go. So you better be careful before you say, this is it or else there, because if you're not successful with it, then you're not going to get your change.
There's another point you made, which I think is incredibly important, and that's to match the task at hand to the person's capability. I love having interns in my office. I always have at least one. It's the summer I had 3, which was a real luxury. And it was I considered my task to match their interests, their capabilities with what tasks we had around. Because I was insistent that they would always do substantive tasks. Because they're an intern, they're supposed to be learning. And once you figured that out, I had no motivation problems. I had no attendance problems. I had no performance problems.
Right.
Because they were put together well. So I really like that point. It takes time. It takes effort. You have to think about it as a manager. But high pay.
Well, I think, to your point, though, look at the conversation that you were having with them there. So you're listening to them. And that's one of the first things, we would talk about. And, when we talked about our 10 tools, one of them we talked about was 4-cylinder communication, and getting managers to understand that they're expressing what they wanted was only one of the cylinders. They had to be able to elicit not just feedback from the person about what they just said, absolutely critical, but they had to also elicit what that person wanted. So it's not even feedback, it's their self-expression. And the fourth part was they had to be able to give feedback on that. And so managers were focused on what I used to call jokingly the Ronald Reagan model of communication, the great communicator, this idea of like, oh, well, you give a speech and that makes you a good communicator. Yes, that's one part of it, but the complete opposite of giving a speech, getting someone else to give a speech, getting someone else to talk to you, which is what you were describing there, that's critical.
I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but you're right. Getting someone else to give the speech. Yeah. Nice shift of thought. Oh, you mentioned the word tool somewhere in that last discussion. Are there tools that we really can use? Because sometimes, when you're talking, and even when I'm talking, sometimes I think, oh my goodness, how is our audience ever going to understand all the intricacies of this? Can we give them a framework to think about?
I don't think that there's any set that says, okay, these are all the tools there. But I got to a certain point where I had been at ETS for a decade, and constantly thinking about, well, what else can I do here? And I was also responsible for the leadership development program, which I personally led with my late colleague Janet Galise. And so Janet was great. She was a Gestalt therapist on top of being a really terrific management consultant that we had brought in-house, and that was so valuable for us. And we started to, well, what are the things that we bring up all the time? And so I identified a list of 10, and none of them were original to me. Everything was, team effectiveness was from J. Richard Hackman, and mental maps was from Gervais Bush, and on these different things that are there. And so we started to do, right after work, we would invite anybody could come, and we would do 10 sessions, so they could take that. And it was so popular that we had to do it 3 times, and we taped it so that people could pick up little snippets of it along the way on our learning management system there. So I, I think that everyone who's involved in the kinds of roles that you and I have been involved in might find it advantageous to say, well, what are the things that worked for me, and what are the things, perhaps more importantly, that I tried that worked for others.
A classic case of sharing what we know, otherwise known as knowledge sharing.
Hmm.
And we get little snippets and gems from what other people are saying. Gosh, and it's funny. We, I think that, well, let me back up. If you put a bunch of I'll say wives together who cook, I
Hmm.
know, okay, we'll talk about cooks. They're going to talk about how they solved a particular recipe issue.
Hmm. Hmm.
But in management, it's often you never want to talk about how you did something because somebody else might get an advantage over you,
Hmm.
or you don't want to, or you don't want to say this is my problem. So how do you really generate that place where people do feel comfortable that they can do that?
Well, and I think, we've mentioned some names already here, but another reason people don't want to talk about it, Amy Edmondson has done a lot of work on, which is they don't want to talk about the fact that something might have failed.
Yeah,
And, if, but even though we know that when you do get them to talk about it, thanks in part to Amy's research, that the failure was not the result of one person that was there. There was something wrong systemically, and the inability or unwillingness to talk about it means that the system's going to be the same, and it's going to produce that same result over and over again. We found that by identifying some frameworks for people, that then they could start to talk about it because they could sort of hold it away from themselves a little
ah,
bit there. And
yes,
one of those frameworks was the first of our 10 tools, the atom of work, which we took from Fernando Flores. And people were sort of surprised, like Fernando Flores, he was a Chilean politician, and but he was also a management theorist. And really, what's interesting to us was that GE grabbed a hold of Fernando's work and started to put it out there, and other companies looked at it as well. And so that's how we discovered it, through that, as you say, knowledge sharing there. And I've had so many people over the years come back to me and say, I use Atom of Work every day. I think we have a snippet of something that we videotaped on that.
we do indeed. Let me bring it on.
What is the atom of work? The atom of work is a means to effective collaboration at a granular level. So there are all sorts of other tools, project management tools, organizing tools that are very useful, and I'm not suggesting that this replaces them. I'm simply saying that the atom of work is a way of understanding how things get done at the most fundamental level, hence the term atom. In the atom of work, you've got a requester and a performer. You've got someone who's asking for something to be done and someone who's doing that something. And by understanding where you sit or stand within that particular dynamic, it makes a huge difference in how you are then supposed to respond. And one of the advantages that I have of having little hair and what's left of it white here is that, having been through a lot of experiences, I could see again and again where problems had resulted, whether I was a consultant before I came to ETS, or running not-for-profits years before that, or in my 14 years now at ETS, because the individuals had not made it clear who's actually the requester here, who's the performer here, and what is it that we have agreed to. So you're going to hear me use words like commitment and promise again and again during this segment here, and knowing whether you are the requester or the performer is critical to understanding the promise that's being made, the commitment that's being made, the conditions that are being set out there.
That's a much younger me. He looked pretty good.
Well, he also was saying some pretty interesting things.
Well, one of the things that was advantageous from being in the knowledge management community was that you got exposed to a lot of different ideas, and some of them were ideas that organizations had not yet looked at. And I would say Atom of Work is an example of that. But behind Atom of Work is all of the Speech Act stuff about whether you're making a performance, a promise, or what is it you're doing there. But Flores's genius was to put it in that very simple, there's a circle there. And then as you go further on there are checks to say, okay, here's what I wrote down about what you told me to do. Are you satisfied?
Mm-hmm.
And the person can say, well, yes, no, there. And then there's a point where you say, okay, I appear to have done, can we declare that this is complete? And one of the difficulties that managers had with this, not all managers, but some managers said, well, no, it's I'm, I'm not the performer here. I'm the requester. And so you had to sort of clarify for them, or they'd say, well, we're collaborating. We're both the performers. No. Somebody here is making a request here. There's something to be delivered. Let's try looking at it at that way. And that really clarified things for people there. And then we moved on to other tools, right? So Sheila Heen and her colleagues at Harvard wrote a wonderful book called Difficult Conversations. And
yes,
so when because Flores would say, there can be breakdowns. No one is assuming the atom of work is going to work every time there. So what do you do when there's a breakdown? And then you've got Sheila talking about, okay, have the conversation with, on the one level, here's what happened. On the next level, how did my view of what happened make me feel? And on the next level, how did that affect my identity? And so you go on to other things that we found that were very useful for people to know that they hadn't been taught. And I don't think there's an expectation. I'm not one of those people who believes that college is simply a career training ground there, that it's an occupational school there. I think college has a lot of different purposes for us, not the least of which is creating a network of friends whom we can then turn to tell us the truth about ourselves later on. And for me at 72, that's still going on with people that I met when I was 17. In fact, tonight, I'll see people I met when I was 13 who will tell me the truth about myself. So you don't get people who come into the workforce with that. And I think that, going back to your original question, is a major issue of identifying where are the gaps in someone's ability to operate in this increasingly complex environment.
And as you're saying that, I'm thinking back to my earlier comment where I matched the task to the intern. One of the things I do is I have certain tasks that I know are very low visibility, low impact. They're still part of the process, but they're low impact. They may be some of the first things I ask the person to do, and it gives me a quick assessment. Okay, they can do this part of it. And so then you build on that. And then as soon as you give them a task that really stretches them too far, then you say, okay, I as the manager have done too much or not prepared them sufficiently. So I have to back off. It's a delicate balance.
Well, it's interesting that you should bring that up, because one of the things that I talk about that I didn't always include in the 10 tools, because it just took too much time. I couldn't do it in a single session. There is Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy's 4-column work there about figuring out why I'm not doing what I'm doing there. And so when I went to get that training some years ago up in Cambridge, and you're this is not abstract. You have to sit down to what's something the people have said there, and the thing I had to say was like, well, I don't delegate enough. And the first answer that a lot of managers, and perhaps even myself at one point, would be like, well, they're not ready to do that. And what the four column work taught me was that it was my own concern that it wouldn't be perfect that was holding that up. And what I needed to start to do was what you did, smaller experiments that then showed me the potential that they had to be able to do these things there, but the work was for me to do. And that the phrase that Keegan and Leahy use is that we go from assumptions holding us to us holding assumptions out in front of us there. This assumption of, well, if I don't do it then it won't be done the right way, to, well, I mean, that let's test that, is that true? And wonderfully, you find out, no, that's not true. It may be done a different way, but it may even be done in a superior fashion.
Okay, so far what I'm seeing is, first of all, it's important to understand, I love the phrase, the atom of work. Uh, I'm not sure that you understand it instantaneously. You probably have to test it with yourself for a while.
Yeah.
And then, depending on the results, you're suggesting there are many possibilities of everything from this four column work you talked about to the I didn't make notes for it, but there were other tools that you could use. Um, I'm thinking of what's maybe one or two that we could expand on for the audience so that they can take that and say, okay, I think I understand this enough that I can try it out.
Well,
And without, of course, graphics.
yeah, I no, I think it's important to sort of say, I think the atom of work is sort of an inverted pyramid, and the atom of work is at the bottom there. That's where this all starts, and then depending upon how things go, where does it go from that? So I'll talk about two. The
Okay,
first one is Gervais Bush's mental maps,
mental maps.
and that's where, in a very simple graphic thing, and people can find this video on YouTube. If they put in mental maps 10 tools, they'll find several videos on it there. A very simple graphic, which is to ask people what they think is actually going on. My old friend Jim Cook used to say, "What does done look like here?" And how do you think we're going to get there? And sometimes in doing this with a group, when I was facilitating a group, I would say, "Oh, no, I don't want you to write down. I want you to draw me a picture." We're back in art class here, and they, "Oh, I can't draw." I said, "No, you can draw. You can definitely you can draw well enough for this exercise. Stick persons are perfectly okay for this exercise." And fascinating things happen. So I'll give you one example. I had just come back from my recovery from operation for my cancer, and it was in my first week back. And I'm sort of like, oh, am I back up to speed or not? And they said, well, you have to go in right away. We're developing a new English language product, and we're just not sure how it's going. So I go into a room, and there are 20 people in the room besides myself. And I say, well, we're going to do this mental map thing. And they're like, well, aren't we going to do project management? No, let's just bear with me. Let's do this first. So I want you to draw me a photo, a picture of what you think is happening here. I got 20 different versions of what people thought the end product was. Now, that's not that surprising when you consider that maybe a third of the people in the room, possibly half, were researchers. And researchers tend to think in terms of their research. So they're thinking, oh, how am I going to advance my research here in terms of this? And then I had another section of people there who were IT people. And IT people were already thinking about the difficulties of how they were going to deliver a product like this globally with security. So they're down in the weeds on that already. They don't even know what the product is there. And then I had the actual new product development people, and they're shocked because they thought that everybody knew. So you take this back to atom of work. There is you perhaps need to use the mental maps to make sure that you that you understand what the request here is, what you're doing. And then the other one that's so
Oh,
important to me,
before you go
just
to that,
yeah,
TJ, I want to just make one comment. I loved that example because every person drew it from their
that's
perspective,
right.
from their task, probably
No,
related to them.
yes, no cheating, by the way. You couldn't look over here or there to see what the other person was drawing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, and that's it, right? There, and that old saying, where you stand depends upon where you sit, is that people who are in a particular way there, but we can make assumptions that everybody is in agreement on something, and we haven't tested out what their mental maps are.
Yeah.
Infamous meeting I was in regarding that where the mental maps weren't done, and so we're like a month from launch of a major product at ETS, a major rollout there. And I separated them into their groups. So instead of having them all do it together, I let the group combine on a picture. And the IT group basically combined on a photo of a disaster or a depiction of a disaster. And the senior vice president, who was in charge of all this, she was going out of her mind. Like, why didn't you tell me this before? And they thought they had.
I thought they had.
See,
Yeah.
that's the other thing is there, checking out these assumptions, and that's why I say, the next thing that I would go to on that is J. Richard Hackman's work around team effectiveness, and there are others who. Chris Argyris obviously had a lot of things to do with that as well, but I found that work to be so instructive because what Hackman found was that a lot of our assumptions about teams were untrue. You didn't necessarily want the seven smartest people on the team.
No.
That was not, that might even be a recipe for disaster there. And you had to take a look at, how the team formed, right? So, how did they get their charge, and what did they have in terms of affordances, in terms of their ability to communicate with each other, and how much were they being supported by the organization in what they were trying to do? I mean, some teams were appointed, and then the organization sort of walked away and sort of said, "Oh, okay, well, you'll figure it out there in terms of doing that," and even thought that that was a good developmental exercise. And I would say, that is cutting the rope on someone while they're on a trapeze is not a developmental exercise. That's sadism. There. Why would you do that to this stuff here? So we would talk a lot about what goes into forming a good team. There are many misconceptions from my experience, not only about teams but about leadership. And so many people sort of come from this kind of and I am a sports fan, but from this football coach, basketball coach mentality of there's this person up there who's telling everyone what to do and riding them hard and then rewarding them at the end of the day. And I don't think that works in business, and I can tell you it doesn't work from my experience before and now in theater. And it didn't work in learning either. That model of in being the sage on the stage is not as effective as being the guide on the side and having people find their way into what it is that they are learning. And going back to something that we've said earlier here is, does the team have a formal structure for reflecting on what they're doing? Nancy Dixon's work, and I knew Nancy Dixon's work before I got to meet Nancy Dixon's work. I went and see her do her stuff there, which was really a treat for me. Her after action review is one of the most valuable things that a team can do. But don't wait until the very end.
Mhm.
Do those in course reviews of what is it we said we were going to do, how did we say we were going to do it,
Mhm.
and how does the reality of what happened match up to that?
Oh, I think of all the things that you just described, I think Nancy's work is just quintessential
Yeah.
because it cuts through. If you did it wrong in the beginning, this gives you places where you can regroup and
Yeah.
regroup and
Yeah.
regroup. I love it. I love it. And the mental maps, I really like that concept because
Yeah.
what
And
they've done is you've shifted their modality. They're not trying to express it in words. They're now trying to express it through graphics, and that's uses a different part of your brain even.
yeah, absolutely. And the first time I did it, uh, we were at a pipe manufacturer in Greenville, South Carolina. There was the usual complaint, we can't do this. And it was funny, they really got into it after a while. Everybody's been in kindergarten, you know. I remember one guy come up and say, "Do you have any different colored markers?" Because I said, "Sure, yeah, go ahead, take the red and purple, go at it."
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that interesting that 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 when they finally break through, then they really begin to embrace the new modality, want the
Yeah,
different colors or whatever. Yes, I've experienced that as well. They'll even get different pieces of paper, different
yeah,
sizes. Yeah,
yeah.
fascinating. All right, so we've got two. We've got the atom of work, and we have two wonderful, wonderful tools that we can tap into.
Yeah.
Well, there is one other thing that you and I have talked about, and I want to see if we can share this with the audience because you shared a word with me that I had never heard before. I had to look it up, and I have a pretty robust vocabulary. And the word was consilience.
Ah, yes.
And I discovered it has a lot of meanings. It's across all the meanings there. The common thread is about bringing information and knowledge and principles together to see what is helpful in defining what information is correct. And as you're talking about all these tools, etc., I'm just really struck with these are methods to bring consilience. But there's another challenge to this, and I don't want to jump ahead, but I want us to also at some point talk a little bit about consilience and AI.
Well, my path to understanding consilience is somewhat like yours. I did not know it as a word at all. Uh, I my dad. I'm the fifth boy in a row, and then finally my sister came, and they were very relieved there. But my father loved to go to used bookstores. He was an electrical engineer, and but he had very wide interests. And then he had this library in the basement that I was allowed to, just peruse and stuff there. So I always sort of am looking for books that are outside of my main interest or what I'm working on, what my occupational interest is there. And one day I came across this book by E.O. Wilson, the Harvard entomologist, and also evolutionary theorist there, called Consilience. And so I had to pick it up, and I picked it up. I started reading the thing. I was, well, it's only fair that I buy it now. I think I'm 20 pages into it there, and so it was a new word, but it was not a new phenomenon to me because I had come across this again and again. The barriers, it's funny. I used to say at ETS, we're not siloed. We're a box of straws. Every particular area, and it developed that way for a reason, right? So it had one big test, and then it sort of cloned off to another test. But then by the time you got done, the people who were working on AP biology never talked to the people who were working on AP math. They might have gone out to lunch with them, but they never talked about what they were doing there necessarily. And certainly the people who were in finance or in IT weren't talking to that there. So there wasn't an opportunity for this consilience, for being able to recognize that there are phenomena and dynamics operating in your realm that have a counterpart in someone else's realm, and therefore what you're learning about their operation and about how to deal with it, how to improve it, how to refine it, how to change it there might be relevant to someone else there as well. And I came across this. I mean, I would talk to people. I'm not going to mention names, who were outstanding theorists in their field. And I would say, you should talk to so and so, because the great advantage of being the chief learning officer at ETS is everybody's willing to talk to you. It was such a treat for me. I send a note to Tom Davenport. I'm in my office late at night one night, and for those who don't know, Tom Davenport, along with Larry Prusak, one of the real progenitors of knowledge management in the United States there. And Tom said, I'm in an airport right now. I wanted to call you back to answer your question. So that kind of thing happens for you. So I would go to talk to someone and say, oh, well, you should read Tom Davenport's book. They'd never heard of Tom Davenport. And they'd be like, well, I don't know, if that's not really my field. I said, yeah, but there's things that he's discovering that are relevant to what you're trying to do here. I still think this is a major problem, that we tend to judge people and identify them in a particular way. A terrifying story for me at ETS that luckily turned out better was that early on in my days there as chief learning officer, I decided to conduct a social network analysis. And for those who don't know, you basically are asking people, who do you go for information? Who do you go for there? British Petroleum were I think the leaders in this, along with your old firm, the World Bank. You did a lot of work in this as well. So, and we just did a rudimentary one. And it took me back to my days in the field of behavioral health and alcoholism, because we looked like a diseased brain. We looked like, as an organization, we had Wernicke's Korsakoff syndrome, that the corpus callosum was down to a few strands there between the half of our brain that was research and the half of our brain that was, for want of a better term, client facing there, those people
Yeah.
who were running the program. So we had these two hemispheres, and here was the part where it seemed like imminent disaster. I said, oh, thank God there are at least, two people here. The next day, one of them said, well, I've got another job, I'm leaving. Oh my gosh, there goes a strand. But it helped us then to understand that we had to bring people together. We had to employ this concept of consilience to get people to understand that they needed to know more about each other, that they couldn't just go off and do their own thing. And that was tough on the research side, because this gets into something that I've mentioned previously about human performance there. How are people compensated? Right? So if you're in research, you're compensated for writing papers. You're compensated for doing things like that. So I'm saying, I'd like you to have a conversation with somebody, and like, how is that going to help me?
Yeah.
So we had to change the compensation system.
Wow. Amazing. And what else is also is amazing is that we've run out of time.
Oh my goodness. Well, look, this has been fascinating. I love watching what other people are doing here. I hope folks have gotten something out of this today, and who knows, online in some way we'll be able to continue the conversation. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. I just feel I've gained a great deal.
Oh, thank you so much, TJ. Why don't you give people your oh no, you don't have your email address on your screen. Would you give them your email address so they can get in touch with
Absolutely.
you?
So I can be reached at knowledgeworkings@gmail.com. So that's no spaces, all lowercase, KNOWLEDGEWORKINGS at gmail.com. Also, we have a website, knowledgeworkings.com. So you can reach me through those ways, and I'm on LinkedIn, and people still get to me through that as well. And if I can be of help to someone, I'm glad to do that, because my whole career is people being of help to me.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Madelyn.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself.
I really appreciated that my guest TJ gave us so many references in support of his content. When I can find the writings of someone who has influenced the thinking of my guests, I can look for my own insights from the same person. The full list of the references can be downloaded from my website, madelynblair.com. The link is posted on YouTube channel as part of the description of the video. So if you're curious, please check it out. As I looked at the list of authors, I was drawn to that of Amy Edmondson on psychological safety. In my own work on resilience, it's clear that when staff feel comfortable to express themselves in a group, the thinking and productivity of the group is enhanced. It's almost like the parable called Stone Soup. Now, if you haven't heard it, it tells of a village where there was very little food. So one woman said that she would make some stone soup. She brought out a big kettle, put some water in it and some stones, and she began to heat it up. Now, others in the village came and said it would be better with some carrots. They went home and they brought back a few carrots to add. Another said that it needed a few bones to give the broth more body, and added one to the kettle. Soon the soup was filled with food, enough to feed the village. I always loved this parable and have used it often when a team has come to a real block in finding something new to solve a challenge that's in front of them. It opens the minds, and I think it opens the hearts as well of the team. And suddenly, new insights begin to spark more and more. And often, the block has been overcome and a new strategy has been found. Psychological safety is like making stone soup. It does more than give people a chance to add their ideas to the conversation. It also invites those ideas with a mind of acceptance, or, well, at least one that recognizes that criticism just gets in the way, that fear shuts ideas down, that willingness to listen sparks new ideas. There's lots more about psychological safety, but in the end, it is about creating the context in which ideas are seen as well-intentioned thoughts, regardless of apparent value. One of the things that goes, or I should say one of the things that does get in the way of open sharing is emotion. Back in July, Dr. Kate Pugh joined me in a conversation called Bringing Your Team Up to the Next Level. As you know, I pull clips from my show and publish each as a mental espresso. Here is what Kate said about my question, what do you do when your emotions become very evident in a discussion? Here's what she said.
Yes, and it's not as if emotion goes away. One of the beauties of working with a group and having the discussion disciplines is that you're suddenly now giving yourself, with that trust building, permission to say, do you know what I just said? That was super emotional. I care about you. And I didn't say it in that manner to hurt you. I said it in that manner because my anxiety was high while I was saying it. I was particularly anxious. And it was not intended to reflect you. It was intended to reflect me.
If you cringe a little as you listen to Kate's simple strategy for handling emotions in a discussion, you're not alone. It's hard to admit we are emotional about something. It shows that we really care about it. I don't really know why our culture thinks emotions aren't useful, but it does seem to. Perhaps it's all about showing that you're in control, and your emotions suggest that you're not. Because of that, it's hard to develop the courage sometimes, let alone the skill, to share about our emotions as Kate demonstrates. Yet, according to her research, the strategy has led to discussions that can continue even when feelings are high. So much so that productivity and success of the team is increased. And by the way, their resilience is also increased. Now, to hear more about it, Watch or listen to her guest appearance. The link to it will also be posted in the description of this episode in YouTube. Now, if you think that Kate's comments are hard to embrace, I'd like to introduce you to Ariana Friedlander. She takes it to another level, right to our inner dialogue about what we are thinking. In her June appearance, called Having Difficult Conversations, this is what she said about when you feel misunderstood. Before I play this, I'm going to ask your indulgence with the background noise and just focus on what she is saying.
And I realized that if I wanted to really change the way I talk to myself, I had to make that a regular part of my practice. I had to routinely journal to myself from the voice of compassion. And so having done that now for 6 years, I can tell my inner dialogue has changed, and I can see how that's reflected in my relationships. And particularly in those moments of stress where my first knee-jerk reaction might be, oh God, again, or something like that. And instead I can go, ooh, that looks like it hurt, and just validate and show compassion. So I think it makes a huge difference. And when we can work with our inner thoughts, our inner dialogue, we can make profound shifts outside of ourselves as well.
And yes, the link to Ariana's appearance is also posted in the description on YouTube. As I thought about this subject of psychological safety, being able to express our feelings and to even acknowledge them within ourselves, I can see why this remains a challenge for team members in business. It takes time and effort and a lot of guts to operationalize what it takes to create psychological safety. By the way, if this is the first time you are learning about mental espresso and you would like to see more of them, they're all posted on my YouTube channel and under the playlist called Mental Espresso. And you can receive them when they are published each week by going to my website and signing up for them. Or you can subscribe to my channel and you'll know every time they're posted. Let me know if you found the back-to-back conversations with TJ more or less helpful to you. It's easy to let me know. Just email me at madelyn@madelynblair.com and tell me. Just put unlocked reactions in the subject line. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.